The report includes a profile from each of Colombia, Mali and Yemen, giving a detailed and diverse sense of the climate conflict gender nexus from the perspective of women and women's organisations. More specifically, this report and the wider project seek to inform the security sector aspects of climate security policy making, to inform what we should ask of police, of environmental protection forces, private security providers, even armed forces that are involved in climate and environmental action. It seeks to articulate how security sector governance can contribute to climate action in a gender responsive manner, and to inform how security sector reform processes and indeed international support to SSR processes can take account of the importance of gender in understanding and responding to the impacts of climate change. The report is formed around 8 recommendations that are drawn from the 3 country contexts. They contain some that you'll probably recognise. For example, the importance of women's meaningful participation and leadership in both climate and security policy making. The need to earmark resources for women's work, and that gender equality goals should be prioritised, of course, in all action on climate and environment. The recommendations also speak to the need to avoid inappropriately securitizing or militarizing responses to the climate and environmental crisis. That is, to strike the right balance between policing of environmental protections and supporting forest and farming communities. And the recommendations look at how we ensure that state and private security actors alike that are involved in environmental projects, environmental controls, maybe clean energy projects, are not themselves a threat to local communities, especially with regard to women and girls. Second, the report recommends that the security sector itself should be required to take steps to mitigate its own climate and environmental impacts, which was an issue that many women's organisations were concerned about. They emphasised the need for data on this, and that there should be data particularly on military greenhouse gases and environmental impacts, and that this sort of sector transparent. Working with women's organisations through this did see security sector reform processes in their countries as an important entry point. An entry point to ensure that the security sector's roles concerning the environment, concerning climate change response, are shaped and executed following principles of good governance, accountability, transparency, and access to justice. The report is available on the DCAF website, published in English, French, Spanish, and also Arabic. Now, alongside this report, through this project, we've made 6 short films, and they provide a really engaging, arresting portrayal of the lived experience of the impacts of climate change in terms of women's lives and gender equality in each of Yemen, Mali, and Colombia. We're going to share just one of those films with you now, one which really conveys how women are organising together.
Nous sommes convaincus qu'il y a un lien indéniable entre les changements climatiques et les questions de sécurité et de paix dans notre pays.
Si vous prenez les causes profondes de la situation sécuritaire au Mali, la grande majorité est due à des effets du changement climatique.
Si no hay alimentación, no hay tranquilidad, no hay vida, no hay paz.
الرجال مشغولون بالحرب، مشغولين بالسلاح، مشغولين بعدة أمور، وهذه القضايا أساساً جاءت بسبب عمل الرجال.
La pauvreté, c'est la femme qui porte. Le deuil, c'est la femme qui porte. la victime première, c'est vraiment la femme et ses enfants.
Hemos llevado una carga muy alta frente al conflicto y por supuesto las mujeres siempre estamos aportando con iniciativas, con ideas.
¿Qué hacemos nosotros las mujeres en Colombia para fomentar paz? Hacemos muchas cosas, primero como todos organizándonos como mujeres y creando la política pública de la mujer, reclamando nuestros derechos.
Lo que se está haciendo es un mapeo de la relación entre género, cambio climático y la agenda de paz y seguridad.
وكل من كان له طرف داخلي أو خارجي في هذه عملية السلام في اليمن أن يضع عملية التغيير المناخي جزء رئيسي من عملية السلام.
Creo que somos de esos actores principales en pro de la paz, porque somos nosotras las dadoras de vida y las que queremos esa paz para nuestros cuerpos y para nuestros hijos. Entonces creo que hemos sido unas guerreras de la vida en pro de la paz.
Thank you, Marta. You can find each of those films also on YouTube, DCAF's YouTube channel, and each of them is available in Spanish, French, and Arabic, as well as English. So it's now my pleasure to invite our representatives of the permanent missions of the United Kingdom and Canada to offer some remarks in relation to this work and this policy area. First, I'd like to introduce Katie Mudrick, who is Senior Policy Advisor on Climate and Security at the Permanent Mission of the UK to the UN. Katie, please.
Thank you so much, Megan, and good morning, colleagues. We wanted to thank you for joining us today to hear from the 6 inspiring women from Mali, Colombia, and Yemen, who will each speak to their own efforts to address climate security and its gendered impacts in their countries and communities. I want to thank our co-sponsors for organizing today's event, and particular thanks to DCAF for their stellar work on this project. We know that existing inequalities exacerbate the impacts of climate change for individuals and communities, limiting their resilience while constraining their options to act. The evidence is clear that women and girls are disproportionately impacted by climate change. 80% of people displaced by natural disasters are women and children. Such disasters, on average, result in the deaths of more women than men. Furthermore, girls in vulnerable households are more likely to be taken out of school for early marriage in times of environmental related crises to help ease the burden of scarce household resources. Women are more likely to be responsible within their families for securing water, food, and fuel for cooking and heating. They are particularly dependent on local natural resources for their livelihoods, and these resources are increasingly threatened by climate change. However, we must avoid narratives that define women as victims of climate insecurity. Climate change impacts are certainly not gender neutral, and women and girls are often left out of or unable to participate fully in decision-making on climate action. The intersections of women, peace and security, climate change, ecological destruction, and conflict or post-conflict situations are clearly complex. A truly holistic response is required, and we must do more collectively. We must continue to support women's full, equal, and meaningful participation and protection in all aspects of peace and security, including the response to climate emergency. This includes the participation of all women, including Indigenous groups, and at all levels and all stages of the process. As part of this, we must ensure the protection of women working to sustain and build peace, including on climate. We must assess the gendered impact of climate change and ensure that solutions are developed with and by women, not for them. We must therefore also ensure that conflict and peace building projects, programs, policy, and research are based on gender, conflict, and environmental analysis. The UK also recognizes the important role of women's rights organizations, human rights defenders, and environmental defenders, who are the key partners in delivering impact on the ground. We must work with them and support them as a matter of priority in response to this climate emergency. I look forward to hearing from our expert panelists on how we can further promote fair and inclusive climate action. Thank you.
Katie, thank you so much for those words. I think they form a really good precursor to our panel. But before going to the panel, I want to give the floor to Lynn Wallace, First Secretary Political from the Canadian Mission to the UN. Lynn, please, welcome.
Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome, distinguished colleagues. The Mission of Canada to the UN is pleased to co-host this event with DCAF, UN Women, the UN Security Sector Reform Unit, and the permanent missions of the United Kingdom and Switzerland. To our esteemed panelists this morning from Colombia, Mali, and Yemen, we are honored to have you join us today to share your perspectives on the impact of climate-related security risks on your countries and what this means for security sector reform and peace building. We look forward to hearing your views on ways that the international community can better support you. We know that deep-rooted gender norms and power dynamics influence women and girls' exposure to climate change risks. And at the same time, women are actively shaping climate mitigation and adaptation in their countries. Ensuring women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in decision-making related to climate mitigation and adaptation improves our responses to climate-related security risks. Through this event, I hope that we can strengthen our understanding of how to better integrate gender considerations into climate security work, and at the same time, how to integrate climate security into efforts to advance women, peace, and security. What are the best peace-building practices that address climate security risks with a gender-responsive lens? How can women's leadership, participation, and decision-making in climate and peace and security processes be better supported? Is the UN Peacebuilding Commission a useful forum to address these issues, where countries that engage with the PBC increasingly name climate security as one of their biggest peace-building priorities and one needing a whole of UN response? We have a lot to cover in the next hour or so, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Lynn, thank you very much. Great questions, and I hope the panelists will be thinking about those as we will move through the discussion. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce our panel of community leaders, experts, and activists who we're really excited and honored to be able to bring together for this event. Firstly, from Colombia, we have Fatima Muriel de Flores. Fatima is the president and founder of the Alliance of Women Weavers for Life of Putumayo, a feminist organization that has, amongst other things, been documenting how environmental and climatic changes in the rivers of the Putumayo affect the lives of women. Also from Colombia, we are joined by Natalia Daza, the environmental justice researcher with our partner organization De Justicia, which is dedicated to strengthening rule of law and promoting human rights in Colombia, which it does through a combination of research, advocacy, and also strategic litigation before the Constitutional Court. From Mali, we are joined by Mariam Ina Koita, the leader of the Forum for Women for Sustainable Development in Mali, as well as another NGO, Interaction Global, that works on education, health, and women's empowerment. Secondly, from Mali, another Mariam Toure Keita. Mariam Toure Keita is the gender and security lead within DCAF's office in Mali. Mariam was formerly the human rights and gender expert for the EU mission in Mali. So in both these roles has been working with the security forces in Mali on gender mainstreaming. Thirdly, from Yemen, my pleasure to introduce Itefa Salam. Itefa is an ambassador for peace in her home city of Taiz and founder of the non-profit Foundation for Environment and Human Development, which works in partnership with the Women's Development Center to promote women's rights and empowerment. And last but certainly not least, Muna Lukman, activist for women, peace and security, co-founder of Yemen's largest women's network, and founder of the NGO Food for Humanity, which has provided aid and water to more than 70,000 families most affected by the war in Yemen. So I'm really pleased to have all of you join us. So let me just say a quick word about the format of our panel. We're going to ask just one framing question to each panelist. We have one question and then another to really allow for the emphasis of our discussion today to be your questions to the panelists. So please start putting your questions in the Q&A as early as you like, so that when we get to our question time, we're ready to move forward. And just to say now, when the panel is finished, we'll have a couple of closing analysis and remarks from representatives from UN Women and the UN Security Sector Reform Unit. So please make sure you do stay to the very end to hear from those experts also. So our first question to the panel, and I'm going to ask this question to Fatima, to Itefa, and to Mariam Toure Kaita. The first question, which is coming to you first, Fatima, is really just to ask you, what's one key reason in Colombia to address the gender, climate change, peace and security nexus?
Muy buenos días.
Good morning all, and thank you very much, DCAF, for allowing me to attend this event. I believe that the key in order to avoid this nexus between gender and climate change in peace and security has to do with the activities regarding generating clean energies that have a great impact on the security of women. This generates destabilization in different areas that have different impacts on women. Women are more affected by pollution because they are the first ones to be in touch with resources, natural resources. This affects their health, their harvests, which generates food insecurity. Also, deforestation and destabilization of the soil. When companies arrive to carry out their activities, that it increases their vulnerability, especially in sensitive ecosystems. Disasters where women are absolutely affected. For instance, displaced women from because of armed conflict, because of poverty, they need to settle along the river banks, rivers that are polluted, and this generates a huge risk. And the different activities that are carried out together with armed actors that represent a threat to environmental leaders, especially in a context where there's no security guarantee. For instance, the CAUSUC agreement that hasn't been approved by politicians in Colombia. These activities are carried out in a context where there's no space for women participation, who are indeed the ones who know their territory. And since they are ignored, they are the ones that suffer the greatest impact. Autonomous corporations, for instance, there's 33 autonomous corporations that are ruled by men who decide on environmental policies in Colombia, whereas we women are the ones who suffer and don't have a say as regards deciding on actions to be taken. I'm sorry about the speaker's speed. That was tremendous. Of course, if there's more time, I have more things I'd like to share, but I'm afraid I didn't have enough time. And should there be any clarification, I'll be delighted to take them and to answer them. There are several organizations, 700 organizations, out of which 150 are mapping different departments, and there are many organizations that have reached the same conclusions regarding lack of security, regarding armed actors that are the ones that are protecting companies, and this has generated a huge amount of problems in Colombia.
Fatima, thank you so much. Be assured we'll come back to you in the Q&A and there will be more time. But I think that was a really helpful first intervention in that you've underscored this central problem we're grappling with of this disproportionate impacts on women, but lack of women's voice in some of these decision-making processes. So second, I'm going to turn to Itefa in Yemen and ask this same question. What's one key reason to address the gender climate security nexus in Yemen? Okay, so I'm not seeing Itefa on camera. I don't hear her.
Assalamu alaikum. Greetings to you all.
Perfect. Please go ahead, Itefa.
I would like to extend heartfelt thanks to you all for hosting me to take part to this meeting and to cast light on the adverse effects related to climate change in Yemen. There are various major causes that have been conducive to this situation. We have gender inequality, and there is also the overlooking of all the tasks and activities conducted by women. There is also the pollution of water because of all the waste that's accumulated in the springs and the rivers. And the table water in Yemen has been severely damaged by all this pollution. There is also the incapacity of making available more resources for actors within the sector of environment in order to better face the adverse effects of climate change.
And such phenomena leads to landslides that hurt infrastructure and gets to homes. And environmental activists are also intimidated by armed groups that curb the efforts of women in protecting the environment if those women cannot have enough safety and protection to be able to act in the field. So there's displacement and homelessness of hundreds of families that had to leave due to the extensive medical waste that pollutes the environment and increases the rate of incidence of disease, in addition to the pollution of the air. Also, the mismanagement of resources and corruption more generally does not help with the climate change action, and the government seems to be unable to plan. Then there is the competition over natural resources, particularly water, helps further fuel the ongoing conflict in Yemen. Then there's drought, and the scarcity of access to water has impacted heavily on girls who have to go far from home and walk long distances to be able to get to a water source. And this increases the pressure on what little natural resources still exist, and also increases the potential for conflict. Then there's also the increase of the extent of planting the cut tree. There are also no proper avenues for the transportation of waste to proper landfills. And if I'm allowed the time, I'll be able to share with you a set of recommendations. Would that be okay?
Yes, a couple more minutes is fine, Itefa. Please go ahead.
Okay, So in terms of recommendation for a sustainable peace and a safe environment, we have to ensure that climate and gender and security are understood as a lived nexus that can be resolved through the support of women and equality. Women leaders need to be supported in the environmental sphere. Also, precautionary measures need to be undertaken to come away with radical solutions to certain environmental issues by supporting women-led organizations and providing them with the support and equipment and technical assistance with the idea of increasing avenues and opportunities for helping the local communities from sheltering themselves from landslides and heavy occasional rainfalls. We need to also increase the participation of women in decision-making processes so that women can be as effective as possible in environmental protection. Because when they are well equipped and they have a say in decision-making processes, that's when they will be more impactful. Women can be a very impactful voice in the protection of the environment because they are known internationally as the carriers of an impartial voice for sustainable development, sustainable security, and sustainable environmental protection. This is why I want to insist also on the protection of women physically, because I myself in 2021, when I was trying to dispose carefully of waste through a campaign of distribution of trash bins, particularly in hospitals, because medical waste is a problem, as I've mentioned. Back then, I was intimidated and I was also threatened. And there was the involvement of a number of parties that stood against me. I'm working for the protection of the environment, but some people just seem to be diametrically against the involvement of women in any sector. And if it wasn't for an advocacy of the people who follow me on social media and who have defended me and mentioned my work among other women in working towards conflict resolution and alleviation, it's only then that some of the intimidation and threats have subsided. We are working towards ensuring that there's a safe corridor for that medical waste to be disposed of. And all we want is to increase the culture of peace among the stakeholders, working towards sustainable peace, basically. I'd also like to recommend that agriculture witness a very needed shift because the heavy plantation of the khat tree is wreaking havoc, and we should switch that to just planting wheat. Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thank you so much. I think you've painted a very, rich and complex portrayal of the intersections between insecurity in Yemen and environment and their particular effects on women, and how we need to recognize that women's physical protection of environmental defenders and human rights defenders, all of these things are interlinked with our peace-building responses to climate and security. Let's turn now to Mali. To you, Mariam Touré Keita, could you please discuss a bit this question that we've asked about the intersections between gender, climate, and peace and security in Mali?
Bonjour tout le monde. Oui, merci beaucoup.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Megan. Hello, everybody. I'm Mariam Touré from Mali. Indeed, if I must speak about the situation in my country, the impact of climate change on the security of women is very important and very much supported. As you well know, my country is a very large country with a large amount in the Sahel, with more than 150,000 square kilometers, with 2/3 of the country, which is a desert. And this has a major impact on the security of women. For example, women are forced to find fuel, that is wood, and also pick the crops to feed their families. The main source in Mali is firewood and coal. And therefore, we have to walk a long distance to be able to obtain these basic resources for the survival of the families. And by going far away to find these natural resources, these women are exposed to many risks of violence by men. But today, in the situation of insecurity in which we all live, there is notably the presence of the jihadists, that is armed men who threaten the lives of women and increase the risk of violence based on gender. And that is why women run a huge amount of risk when they have to go obtain those natural resources to be able to ensure the survival of their families and the life of the society as well. In the case of my country, Mali, the variability of rainfall and the long droughts and the reduction of natural resources has a major impact on the livelihoods, that is the traditional livelihoods, and leads to conflicts between the farmers and the people who have livestock, and prevent people to ensure their livelihood. And this threatens the food security and also the physical security of people. This is a reality that we're living in my country, and the traditions and the customs that we have in our country, and masculinity plays a major role. And we don't focus enough on women, and women do not have the right to own land. And this leads to conflict situations and exacerbates the empowerment of women. And therefore, they have very few opportunities. They can't move easily, and they can't obtain resources to be empowered and to take their own decisions. And so many of the dimensions of security of women is impacted by climate change. And it is important today to remove oneself to a very strict sense of security of states so that you can have a holistic approach to security. And we have to include climate change in addition to the regular notion of security. If I can make a recommendation for the benefit of my country, I believe that we have to support my country in a vast campaign for reforestation in order to increase the capacity of our women and our families to be able to be empowered and to take their own decisions, and to also their food and their entire security as an integral security. Thank you very much.
Mariam, thank you very much. I think that raised a lot of very interesting points that come out also in the report we've published today. For example, the need to look at security very holistically with a human security lens, and not to focus on traditional notions of state security in thinking about peace building and climate. I also really was interested that you were linking these problems to questions around women's legal rights in relation to land. I mean, these are very much questions of security sector governance also that we can look at within that sort of program lens that have a role to play in relation to climate and security and peace building. So I'd like to now move to our second question, which is more focused on recommendations. And if I may, I'll start with you, Muna, and then go to Natalia and then to Ina. So we wanted it to now switch more to the question, thinking about the international community as the audience for this webinar primarily. Of course, you all do national level activism as well with national stakeholders. But when you think of the international community, be it the UN or bilateral donors or other international mechanisms that are engaged with peace building and climate policy in your country, what is one perhaps key recommendation or request that you would make to them? Turning to you first, Muna.
Thank you, Dr. Megan, and thank you everyone for attending. It's been really an honor working with you all on this project. There's a lot of recommendations, Dr. Megan. I have here a whole list, but I will try to zoom in a little bit. But let me just say that the main recommendation is coming out of the severe climate change and its related impacts in Yemen that we have actually been witnessing now. It's not just something that we're preparing for. We're already seeing the drought, the desertification, the storms, the torrential rains, sea levels, and the devastation that's coming with it. And this is all adding to a protracted humanitarian crisis in Yemen, and adding more fuel to the fire, if I may say, to the armed conflict, to the collapse of the economy. And then we also have a major problem, which is the water in Yemen. And now, so we have the water scarcity, and we also have the weaponization of water, which is unfortunately being happening by both sides of the conflict, and it's prolonging and aggravating the acute famine. So all of this has really led to a collapse in the health services, the education services, the shelters, and it has also increased the cycles of violence, which are affecting the women and girls in particular, but it's also mobilizing or increasing the mobilization of youth into battlefields. And this is something that I wanted to highlight. So given this quick background, I would say that my key recommendation would be that the gender, climate, peace and security nexus is not yet comprehensively approached and addressed in peace building activities in Yemen by the international community, the UN-led peace process, and by actors, international and local. But we do have now a sudden movement of local actors, which needs to be supported. There is significant scope, I might say, that for the international and national peace building actors to incorporate a more targeted climate change and security issues into their into the upcoming, hopefully, agreements of peace agreements. And I think that there should be more support through the humanitarian and development initiatives and support, and the donor community that's supporting Yemen should focus a bit more on supporting the social and institutionalizing the capacity of both the national and local institutes in Yemen. This will help more in preventing more conflicts and managing the adaptation or maybe enhancing the adaptation and resilience of the people and of the institutes themselves. So I think I will stop there and be open to any questions. Thank you.
Muna, thank you very much. A lot of interesting issues raised that I'm sure we'll come back to in questions. Natalia, turning to you to reflect from Colombia and what sort of recommendations you would have for international interlocutors, please.
Hola a todas y todos, encantada de estar aquí.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm very happy to be able to share this project with DCAF. We have many recommendations to make, such as Muna just said, but I would say that the most important one is financing by the international community for any projects, research work, and policies that have this nexus. Something that can be done is to directly help feminist and environmental movements that are working in any subjects that related to this. This could be done through financing and supporting projects which are related to these fields. And in another way, this could be done by supporting women's requests and environmentalist requests. This could be done by financing research related to this nexus. And we have two reasons for this. First of all, because we need data with specific experiences. We have these, but we don't have a larger image, a general image, and data, empirical data that can help us get a broader image of what's happening. And we also need more data of specific cases. In Colombia, for example, we know that some companies are really affecting women. And this is affecting mostly rural women and indigenous women, but we need more specific empirical data to know what's really happening. And another way in which financing can help is by financing projects which try to mitigate the impact of climate change. As we know, women not only have fewer resources to fight climate change, but they also have fewer alternatives in order to access financing resources that will enable them to adapt and become more resilient to climate change. So that's why that financing is so important. And it's important that all the funds have a gender viewpoint, but also it is important to understand the context. Next week, for example, we have a meeting where Colombia will present a project, FP 182, which is aiming to raise funds. However, those who will benefit from that funding won't be the small communities, but the large enterprises that are related to paramilitarist movements in Colombia. Some of these groups are military groups that have committed the largest attacks or the most violent attacks against women. So we can't fund groups that are affecting women and exerting violence against women. So how can we finance those groups? That does not make any sense.
Natalia, a very interesting and important point that you're making. And I think raising this wider issue of funding for women's work, for, as you say, research on gender climate intersections is really critical. I think we all see now huge amounts of money being directed towards climate action, and we really need to be pushing that money comes to women's organizations, as well as, you know, the many other actors who are lined up to take that money and to benefit from those funds. So thirdly, back to Mali, and over to you, Mrs. Mariam Inakoita. Very pleased to have you with us. Thank you for joining us, and really inviting you to share some thoughts and recommendations for the international community engaging with Mali on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello to everybody. The Malian actors of society and security have to broaden their traditional approach to security, examine the concept of human security, and examine the impact of climate change on the personal dimension, political, economic dimension, health dimension, and all the other dimensions of human security. And in addition to that, the actors, stakeholders of security have to listen closely to what women have to say in order to find out what they have to say about security. And women should no longer be victims and must be stakeholders and players seated at the decision-making table so that they can participate. And so those who are supporting Mali have to support the nexus between gender, security, and climate change, with the participation of women. This plan must be implemented in close collaboration with women's organizations in Mali, because the nexus of security, gender, and climate change must be taken into account. In terms of negotiation, I'm specifically working with the ministry that has established a working group to take into account the dimension of gender, and have specifically created administrative bodies to work for the benefit of women in order to challenge what is happening on the planet. And I've talked about this before, the ministries of promotion of women, of children and of families, and the Ministry of Labor and Social Dialogue, because we're talking here about a dialogue. And we have to allow dialogue to prevail among women, and also the Ministry of the Environment, evidently, to work on climate change. And of course, the Ministry of Reconciliation, Pay and Social, Peace and Social Vision. And so these different ministries work together in order to set up committees that are strategic committees, so that we could remove ourselves from the current situation that is preventing us from working.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Koita. Very interesting. I think it's very useful that you really highlight the diversity of ministries, government ministries, that we need engaged in these responses. This was an issue that very much came up in the workshops that we did, that perhaps we went into this process thinking very much of a women, peace and security lens, but we found that women were very much saying, well, yes, women, peace and security is important, but actually we need to engage with new actors like ministries of environment, sanitation departments, departments responsible for water and energy, ministries that perhaps aren't part of a country's women, peace and security architecture. That the issue of climate really challenges us to look beyond and reach beyond the existing institutional actors. And I think that's a challenge to how we sort of engage and reach out to new actors with our policy making. Thank you very much to all of the panelists for getting us started. We now have 20 minutes still to have a good further engagement with our panel. There may be some hot seating on the New York end, but I invite anyone who would like to ask a question to put that into the Q&A function, which you find on the bottom of the Zoom sort of toolbar along the bottom of Zoom. So we have one question already, which I'm going to ask to the whole panel, and perhaps invite our friends from Colombia to respond first, then Yemen, then back to Mali. So the question is, how can the voice of women and girls be heard through climate security? Or put differently, what are the climate security environmental processes where women need to be heard? So it's both a how and a where question. Colombia, over to you, Fatima and Natalia.
Thank you very much for that question. I think that what we need are environmental participatory processes which are real. What do I mean by that? We need the participation is significant, and that there are guarantees for women's participation, and that this always has a gender lens. So when we say that we need significant participation, it means that women and communities need to have the right to make decisions where they want a project to be there on their territory. And this requires access to information. So governments need to provide tools and resources so that communities can carry out studies and counter studies on environmental impacts. We don't need companies to carry out these impact studies. And in these studies, we need to have guarantees that ensure that women will have full participation. We need information to be accessible to these women. We need to have spaces where they can take care of their children. Many of these women cannot access these spaces because they have someone to take care of someone. So it's important to provide them with space where they can leave children or elderly people. And this is something we don't have in Colombia because the companies just arrive here. They don't take into account women, and at the end of the day, women are the most affected by these activities. What do you think? I think it's important to recommend to the Ministry of Education to focus on the syllabi from primary school all the way to higher education. We need to provide students with gender lens because they graduate and they have no conscience about what gender really means. So I think it's important, and something that we're doing in our organizations is to train women, for example, in tourism and in the environment, to know what could happen, and they need to understand what the risks are when they work fighting against these large companies.
Thank you. Very interesting responses. Itefa, would you like to add anything? I apologize, I can't see you, so I can't, I'm just openly inviting you if you would like to intervene in response to that question. Muna, let's go to you then. I'm not hearing Itefa, and we can come back to her, please.
So on the just a second. Okay. So on the gender and how to maybe the mechanism or the how, one of the things that I think that we need to be focusing on for Yemen at least is that building upon my previous recommendation, is that the international community especially needs to not only fund, but also support in their messaging and advocacy and pressure with not only with the authorities, but also with the civil society and with the security and the police. And it needs to have a holistic approach. I remember when we started the advocacy, and then so many people saying it's not the time for it now. It's not the time for it now. I mean, it's climate change is such a, it's still far away. It's kind of like far away. So when we needed to bring it down to localize it more, so that people would understand and start seeing the seriousness of it, and we started posting some of the impacts, and so people started to ask us more, and we actually had some of the local authorities coming to us and say, what is this project and what's it about? And then they told us that they're also doing some things. Do you have women in there? What, the why should we have women? It was really difficult for them to comprehend. They do have some women, but they're on more administrative levels. So we started showing them some of the local activities and initiatives such as Irtifas. I remember once a few years back, there was a big flooding in the city of Taiz, which is already under siege. And the flooding would have caused a major blockade with rocks coming from the mountains and all of that. And thousands of houses would have been demolished completely. And we did an initiative together with Irtifa and Food for Humanity, and it was, we responded so quickly that even the authorities were like, when did this happen? How did you fundraise? How did you do this? So I think that really showcasing by the international community, especially because they're highly involved. I keep saying that because they're very highly involved. They're funding, they're very involved in all of the peace process. So we need them to support us also on the local ground. On the policy making, on working with the civil defense, on the health providers to enhance the promotion of women's access to decision-making places is very important, and it's really just a priority right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Muna. And Mariam and Ina, would you like to add something from your perspective? And then we'll try again with Irtifa. Thanks.
Merci beaucoup de nous repasser la parole.
Thank you very much for giving us the floor again, so that we can take up these questions once again and to respond to them. And I would like to complete what has already been said in the framework of this forum. I believe that the mechanisms and the voice of women can be heard, and the mechanisms for their participation. I believe that the organization of projects and also the workshop that we had gave us an opportunity that we took advantage of here in Mali, the Malian women. We had feminist organizations that participated in this workshop, and the films that Megan talked about, the films about the Malian women, the women here said that it was the opportunity for them to understand the nexus between gender, security, and climate change. They were working each as a silo, separately. Some worked on the agenda of peace and security, and others working on the environmental matters, but they had not established the link between these different fields. And that is where we have to reinforce, strengthen the capacity of women. We have to continue to open now, if I am permitted to use this expression, to open the eyes of women on this problem so that they can participate, broaden their voice, include this in their messages, everything that has to do with the disproportional impact of climate change on these women. I also believe that in my first intervention, I talked about funding of projects. It involves having well-structured projects for the benefit of women, and not only for women, but I talked about reforestation. I talked about that. That involves protecting our ecosystems, because we live in very difficult and fragile times that do not enable us to even work, because the impacts of climate change, of a drought, prevent us from working and prevent our energy to be channeled for the benefit of our ecosystems, and to start projects in that direction. We have to focus on this. And the third element that I wanted to talk about and draw attention to was the conception of projects for energy use. In our countries today, energy sources are firewood and coal, and that is harmful for the environment. And so we have to make an energy transition, and that we have to implement projects that allow us to save energy, but also save water, because today, because of climate change, we live a scarcity of our water because of the drying up of our rivers. And so we have fewer and fewer sources of water, and we suffer from that. I would like to stop now and give the floor to my colleague Ina, who has a wide range of experience with respect to her forum, and will complete what I have said. Thank you very much. As we said, climate change is one of the major causes of the security crisis in Mali. Without that, there's not a security or the safety of women. We have examined and we have started to raise the awareness of women, and we have approached decision makers. We're talking here about the Ministry of Reconciliation and Peace. The ministry gave a training to 50 women in Mali. And once these women were trained on social cohesion and peace, we then went to the regions in the villages themselves, in the communities, and we went even the high-risk areas, for example, Monti, in the red zone, and we went to those areas. The women said over there that since the crisis began, this is the first time that women's groups have come towards them and approached them. And so we raised awareness of these women, and many of these women left. And there's a partnership over there because there are many women who had been impacted by attacks. And we were able to have contact with them that were witnesses and were able to provide witness statements. And these women were supported psychologically. And we went in other regions and we raised the awareness of many women there. And we are working in the field, and we are always raising the awareness of women on the subject of social cohesion and security and peace, and that we have to be work together as Malians, and that we are coming from Mother Earth, and we all belong together and have to work together. We have benefited from training, but it's very timid and not enough. And so we've asked our stakeholders and our partners to help us, to support us in this with fish farming, for example, aquaculture, because the climate is changing now. And there is also an absence of security, and people can't, and women can't even go to the fields to work on their crops. And so we are focusing on agriculture, for example, in our cities and our building. There are places and cities that are devoted to farming, that is to ensure the empowerment of women. And we also have fish farming with fish tanks to inform the women and empower them in a different way, because without empowerment, women will be difficult to support. Right now, we are providing training on the agro-food activities. And we are providing training on this agro-food, for example, fresh vegetables, potatoes. When you harvest the potatoes or the vegetables, they are transformed into food, and women do that. And so we are giving that, and we are doing this in the households and the same groups of women. But the problem is that we don't have the potential partners that could help us. And so we need support. We need further support, because we're not simply talking about certain women, we're talking about all the women. There are NGOs, associations, women's associations, and organizations. So right now, I would like to stop, if that's okay.
Ina, thank you so much. I think, again, you really underscore the important work that women do in really different ways, as you say, both engaging with groups in what sounds like quite difficult, dangerous contexts, and also women's more economic activity related to more sustainable businesses. Now, I'm hoping we can come back to Itefa in Yemen. We've had some slight problems, I think, with her hearing us. So let's just pause for a moment and see if we can get Itefa back. Itefa, can you hear us? It sounds like, unfortunately, not, but you'll see that. Oh, here we go.
So we need to make sure that women's voices are heard. And this requires awareness raising as to women's rights. We need to further support women, empower them, and also make available various capacities and resources in order to be able to trespass the boundaries set up by the patriarchal societies and regimes under which they evolve. Women are actually peacemakers versus men are war makers, and men often compel women to make war. War is actually man-made, and therefore women need to be involved in the decision making if we want a sustainable peace, a peace that's going to be long standing. Women need to be able to face all challenges through support, through mentoring, and through making all resources available to them. This is how we will be able to make it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Atefa. I'm so glad that we can actually hear you in this whole effort, which is structured around hearing women's voices. But I think it underscores the difficulty we often have as sort of policymakers on the international sphere, that it's often difficult to actually bring women physically together these days, to, you know, and bring women together from different countries to have these conversations. So with such rich answers, we don't have room for a lot of other questions, but I want to ask one that also provides a segue into our closing session with our experts from UN agencies. One of the questions we have received is, what more could the UN Security Sector Reform Unit specifically do? And I think we might interpret that as, for those of you that have engagement with the United Nations structures in your countries, what more do you see that the UN specifically could do to support women's work and to support the protection of women around climate and security issues? Again, turning to you first, Colombia, Fatima and Natalia.
As regards security, there are two things involved. One of them is related to women's work, and the other thing has to do with government. In Colombia, there's a tendency regarding securitizing policy. For instance, the issue of drugs in armed conflict. What they did was to come and put harvests on fire. And same happens with the anti-deforestation politics or policies, in order to generate incentives so that people will not have the need to cut down trees and forests in order to be able to make a living. People do this in order to be able to survive, build a home, cook, and obviously they need wood. So first of all, we need to make sure that the military will not put at risk the lives of women, their resources, so that their houses will not be burnt down. But the idea is that this will be one only measure in order to prosecute large deforestators. And second, they need to make sure that other measures are being taken and other economic incentives exist, so that these small agriculturists, farmers will not have to resort to cutting down trees and forests in order to be able to make a living and survive. For instance, there's actions to manage risk. Specific functions and roles must be played by the military and police forces. That is rather to protect women and to create secure and safe spaces for women. That on the one hand. On the other hand, there's the idea to support women's association, to support their projects, because these women are generated economic alternatives projects that also diminish their vulnerability to climate change. This is super important, because now in Colombia, the initiatives we see regarding these areas affected by armed conflicts where they don't have any clear regulations. So some of these initiatives are useless unless we consider climate change in the long term, because this may result in a rebound effect that will lead to an armed conflict again. So these are a couple of things we need to bear into account. This hand in hand with women who are the ones that need this support the most. Yes, in the case of Amazonia, we know that the UN is leaving their offices, they are withdrawing, but we need the opposite thing to happen. We need them at the borders, the frontiers, where we start seeing armed conflict due to drug dealing and other things. And also the United Nations, as my colleague has said, need to focus on women's organizations that are working, presenting proposals, and where they're forest, the places where they live, because they are the ones who are most related to their forests, their rivers. They are mapping all the rivers in Colombia. So the only hope is for the UN to be closer to us and to be hand in hand with us in order to be able to transform our department and actually to convey the lesson that peace can be made thanks to the work of women.
And Mariam and Ina in Mali, would you like to respond? Perhaps I could ask briefly, as we're coming toward the end of our time, to this question. Do you see particular things that the United Nations could be doing better in Mali on this issue?
Merci beaucoup pour cette question.
Thank you very much for this question. I believe that the UN could do many things, because we have today in Mali UN Women, which is present and which works with the women's organizations of Mali for the empowerment of women. And there is work and projects now that are being implemented in our country that support women's organizations in order to ensure their empowerment in the framework of the peace, security, and women or gender agenda. So we work on that, and we have to fast track this program and to steer it as well towards projects that are well structured to take into account the disproportionate impact of climate change on women. We're talking about a reorientation of these projects towards projects that are energy transition, agroeconomy, for the benefit of women, to ensure the food security of women, and to start up projects for the growing of fresh vegetables that will help women deal with food insecurity. In the film on Mali, the women talked about that, and they said that by starting these gardens and setting up these cooperatives of women, by initiating this type of project, they were able to improve the health of their families, and children were able to go to school thanks to the work of these women who worked on these gardens of fresh vegetables. And they also improved maternal health, and they had less problems when they were pregnant. They were able to help their husbands as well. And they were also impacted by the crisis that we are all living in Mali. And so this is very important. And they were we have to reorient the projects, redirect projects towards projects that fight against climate change. And that is very important for me. Another element that's important, the UN must participate to build up the capacities of women's organizations, and we would have to build up the capacity by means of training or working on this nexus that we've been talking about between security, climate change, and gender. Mariam, would you like to take the floor? Yes, we know that, the agriculture is the main, cattle, agriculture, and fishing are the major activities of Mali. And so when I talked about the UN, I think that they must provide more support to our activities in other sectors as well. I believe that the capacity building of women is never as much as we would like to have with UN Women, for example, in Mali. We have met the Minister of Foreign Affairs and also international cooperation. And that was 3 years ago. So we wanted to have access to UN Women, but we have not been able to have access to UN Women. And the president or the chair of FAOD International, Madame Apela Rose Aber, the headquarters is in Bern, Switzerland, and she wrote a letter to New York to the director of UN Women to facilitate the meeting of UN Women, but we have not been able to have that meeting. And that is the same thing for many women's groups in Mali. If UN Women could change its strategy and to spread its actions to all of the women's groups, probably not all, that would be too much probably, but to the majority of them so that we could have something concrete, and so that we can say that women are beginning to be empowered. According to me, UN Women is working partially with certain groups, but not enough groups. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. If we could finally go to Muna to respond to that question specifically in relation to the UN, briefly, if you might, Muna, just so we can leave some time to actually hear from the UN at the close of the webinar. Thank you.
Yes, we would like to hear from the UN also, and I really second the comments of my colleagues. So in Yemen, first of all, climate change is related to the humanitarian aid, reconstruction, and recovery for Yemen. And in my personal view, and many of the people in Yemen, the whole humanitarian aid needs to be restructured. Restructured in a way to focus on more livelihoods, more development projects that really can help the people revive, and also it will prevent a lot of the violence which is related to the food insecurity. This is one of the major points that would really relieve the suffering. Multi-stakeholder collaboration is very important between civil society, the private sector, the youth, the women, local communities, who not only need a capacity. So I do second my colleagues when they say we need more capacity, but I also say that women, local women groups and youth have the capacity, they have expertise. We just need to listen to them. It might not be exactly in the framework that we might think of, but it is their knowledge, their local knowledge, and each area is different to the other. We need to open up to listen to them. And we've seen in COVID-19 how they had the access, they responded in their own ways, and they had major impact. I think that the failure to work together is really causing a lot of inefficiency, and there is a huge gap. We're missing a lot of opportunities to help build a better society, for instance, in Yemen. And I think that this needs to change through a multi-stakeholder approach. I think for maximizing the efficiency, we also need to bridge this multilateral, bilateral, and local actor capacity. But at the end of the day, no amount of aid will help Yemen, only stopping the war, stopping the conflict. So that is our major priority, but that does not have to mean that we need to stop any other projects. It's been already 8 years now. It's a protracted war. We need to start thinking out of the box. and start empowering the people on the ground. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Muna. And that really brings to the end the time we have for questions and answers and engagement with the panel. At this point, I'd like to very much thank all the panelists. I think we've really covered a lot of the issues that we raised in our report and that we've been trying to get to through this project to really understand the nuance of the intersections between gender and climate in conflict-affected countries, and the sorts of concrete things that international community stakeholders could do to support women. On that note, I would very much like to say a warm welcome to Sarah Douglas, who many of you will know, I'm sure already. She's the Deputy Chief of the Peace and Security Unit within UN Women, and somebody who has been working on these issues for a very long time. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Megan, and thank you so much to all of the colleagues and co-sponsors for a very interesting and insightful discussion so far. And I've heard the comments from our colleagues from Yemen and Mali, but I think for the sake of time, we could take those offline and follow up bilaterally on those specific concerns related to those countries. And the organizers can provide my contact information to do so after today's event. It's my pleasure to provide a few concluding remarks at the end of this really important event that we're having during the Commission of the Status of Women, which is now in a hybrid format after last year's fully virtual event. This year's session focuses on one of the most urgent issues of our time, which is the unprecedented impacts of the climate crisis, which are now compounding by the COVID-19 pandemic and all of the impacts of conflict and crisis around the world. Today's participants have highlighted how local manifestations of climate change are interacting with peace and security concerns and how gendered these crises are. Yet at the same time, we see women activists and peace builders at the front line addressing these interlocking crises and demonstrating the power of feminist analysis and action to mitigate these complex risks, which gives all of us hope as well as a very clear blueprint for further action. I'd like to highlight three crucial reflections to move forward based on today's discussion. Firstly, we must ensure that gender considerations are reflected in policy debates on climate-related security risks. Women peace builders, like our very esteemed colleagues who have been on the panel today, have to be front and center to share evidence, provide context, and nuance these debates. Secondly, we must invest in gender-responsive programming that uses climate-related intervention as an entry point. I'd like to highlight our joint study on gender, climate, and security that we've done jointly with UNEP, UN Women, UNDP, and PBSO that revealed that understanding the gender dimensions of climate-related risks is not only key to avoiding exacerbating vulnerabilities, but can also provide entry points to bring traditionally marginalized groups into leadership and decision-making positions. And thirdly, climate finance must reach women and girls in fragile and conflict-affected contexts who face increased vulnerability and low climate investments. Financing decisions still neglect the peace dividend created by women and young women on the ground. Unless we consider the impact of gender inequalities and set specific funding targets using gender equality markers, we will not succeed in channeling climate finance in a way that builds long-term capacity, expertise, and sustainability. Thank you all so much for your attention, and a special thanks to the UK, Canada, and Swiss missions, the UNSSR unit, DCAF, for organizing today's event, and especially thanks to our expert panelists who've provided such interesting and insightful interventions today. We value all of your partnerships and look forward to continuing this discussion as we go forward.
Sarah, thank you. And then finally introducing the Deputy Director of the UN Security Sector Reform Unit within the Office of Rule of Law and Security Institutions, Jared Rigg. Jared, please.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you very much. And thank you all for an inspiring event, which takes place in the context of an equally inspiring Commission on the Status of Women. Thank you to our esteemed panelists, women's leaders and climate activists, Ms. Daza, Dr. Katra, Ms. Muriel, Ms. Lukman, Ms. Salaman, and Ms. Torre Kita for making this event possible, for your moving interventions and for your leadership and courage on the issues of gender, equality, climate change, and security sector governance. Your stories and your experiences in Colombia, Mali, and Yemen are motivational calls to action. Let me also take this opportunity to thank all of our generous co-organisers, including the Permanent Missions of Canada, Switzerland, and the UK, as well as UN Women, of course, and the Geneva Centre for Security Sector Governance, DCAF, for their leadership and generosity. And of course, please join me in voicing a special thanks to Germana, to Kavya from the SSR unit, as well as to Megan, Amrita, and Camille from DCAF, and of course to Tanya and Kyra from UN Women, and also Sarah, of course, for their tireless efforts in organising this really super event. And last by no means, I'd like to thank all of you, our meeting's kind participants, for taking the time from your hectic schedules, they're all hectic, we know, to listen, to learn, and to offer some questions. While your contributions are critical at any period, they mean even more today, considering the time in which we live, individually and as individuals, as professionals, and as members of one international community and one people that we find ourselves in. We are, as our Secretary General does his utmost to remind us, in a time of crisis. Not that we need his reminder, just listen to the stories of our panelists today. Note the virtual nature of this meeting. We are indeed at a precipice. As the SG has recently reported, we are without a doubt in a 5-alarm global fire. But sadly, just as the story goes, as frog perhaps in a pot doesn't feel the water boiling, a vast swathe of people, and worse yet, scores of influential international leaders don't seem to feel the heat, figuratively, and as the world begins to boil, literally. There are many who still, as of yet, have not been able to put 1 + 1, or tsunami and wildfire, or extreme weather and the current pandemic together. And together, the answer is not 2, it's emergency. In this respect, I still find it hard to fathom how we in 2022 have yet to throw off the shackles of a patriarchal system that has in so many ways failed us all. A system that limits and in many places, as reported by Ms. Salam, actively subdues the leadership of women, the participation of women, the voices of women and girls on climate and national security. This alone is an emergency for our immediate action. Perhaps in realizing gender equality generally and in the area of national security, we might also come to better respect that too long ignored voice of our collective mother, nature. How is it that despite the gendered impact of the violence and the instabilities caused by climate change, and despite women's leadership as frontline security sector responders and agents of good security sector governance, women are still disproportionately left out of national security and SSR decision-making on crisis recovery and response? This is also an emergency. I still can't grasp how, when the climate has changed so significantly from what it was when many of us were still little, which wasn't that long ago, and when the change drivers are literally pointing toward a hell on earth by 2100, which, as Ms. Torre Kita shared, it already is for many. How many national security systems around the world are still not preparing themselves to address the palpable climate-related challenges and threats of the future. For example, in terms of crowd control, environmental protection, reforestation, disaster recovery, and combating what might possibly come violent climate extremism. Yet another emergency. And most are not doing this through a gender lens, which brings me back to the failures of a patriarchal system. We are all still battling. Is, in my humble view, one of the keys to our collective salvation, to truly douse the flames of our five-fire global alarm, our global fire. As our 21 report on women, peace and security stresses, we need to address the issues of gender inequality, climate change and SSR and governance together. But we have no time to wait. It cannot be business as usual. We need immediate, as Ms. Salam mentioned, radical solutions. What we may have called for a decade ago when it wasn't so clear that the house was on fire may simply not be enough to turn us back from the brink today. So I look forward to the outcome of DCAF's project on Women Speak, the lived nexus between climate, gender and security. And I pray that it will push every boundary possible and not shy away from the controversial in light of the fact that we are in a crisis. Let me take this opportunity to wish you all the very greatest of impact. Together, I hope that we can address all of these emergencies and turn this world around for our children and for the many creatures of this planet for whom we are also responsible. Thank you.
Jared, thank you very much. That was very beautifully and powerfully put. So it remains to me only to echo the thanks that have been offered to all our partners, particularly to Fatima and Natalia, Muna and Etefa, Mariam and Ina, some of you who've gone to quite extensive inconvenience to be in New York for this event. I would really like to acknowledge and thank my DCAF colleagues, Amrita Kapoor, Camille Rizla, Marta Gatoni, and Taka Takushi, who you haven't seen, but who have worked really hard to make this webinar happen. Be assured we'll share a written report of our discussions. You can watch it again on YouTube and share it with your family and friends. And of course, you'll find the report and the really fantastic films on the DCAF website and YouTube channel. Thank you again. Wishing you all the best in the important work that you're doing.